I had always been fascinated by history, so when I got a chance to visit London, the Tower of London was at the top of my list. I didn't expect anything out of the ordinary to happen, but what I experienced there, I'll never forget. It was one of the late tours, right around sunset. The crowds were thinning, and the shadows of the ancient walls seemed to stretch and twist as the light faded. Our guide took us through the usual spots, the Bloody Tower, Traitor's Gate, but something about the place felt off that day. The air was heavy, like the walls were holding on to some terrible secret. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the eerie history getting to me. Toward the end of the tour, I decided to break off from the group for a moment. I've always been one to wander off the beaten path, and the tower felt like it had more to offer than what the guide was showing us. I found myself in an old, narrow corridor, dimly lit with barely any foot traffic. The stones beneath my feet were cold, and the silence in that corridor was oppressive, almost suffocating. That's when I saw him, a soldier dressed in the traditional beefeater uniform, standing at the end of the corridor. His posture was rigid, face stern, and his eyes, there was something unsettling about them. They didn't move. At first, I thought he was just a guard stationed there, but it struck me how still he was. No movement, no blinking, nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept walking toward him, figuring I could ask for directions back to the tour group. As I got closer, I noticed the uniform was tattered, like it had been through something unimaginable, like it had been buried and unearthed. I called out to him, "Excuse me, can you point me back to the main hall?" He didn't respond, didn't even acknowledge me. That's when it hit me. He wasn't breathing. I stopped in my tracks, maybe 10 feet away from him now, when he suddenly moved. But it wasn't natural. It was jerky, like a puppet pulled by strings. His head snapped toward me, eyes still fixed in that unnatural stare. His mouth opened, but instead of words, all I heard was a raspy, choking sound. My chest tightened, and every instinct screamed for me to run. I turned and sprinted back the way I came, heart pounding in my ears. I found my tour group at the main hall, but I didn't say anything. Who would believe me? But as we were leaving, I asked one of the guides if there had been any guards stationed in that corridor. He gave me a puzzled look and said, "That area's been closed off for years. No one should have been there. I've never felt fear like that before. And to this day, I can't shake the image of that phantom guard silently watching me as I fled." I've never been one to believe in ghosts. Sure, I love a good scary story, but I've always been a skeptic. That changed after my trip to the Tower of London last year. It was late autumn, and the tower was quieter than usual, the chilly air keeping most tourists away. I was with my partner, and we were both excited to explore the history. As we walked through the various rooms and exhibits, the atmosphere felt heavy, like the walls themselves were pressing down on us, full of centuries of death and tragedy. One area in particular got to me, the old prison cells. You could practically feel the anguish of the people who had been locked away there. My partner was interested in reading the plaques, but something in me told me to keep moving. I felt drawn to one cell at the far end of the room. It was darker than the others, the light barely reaching the inside. As I stepped closer, I swear I heard something, like the faint sound of breathing. I froze. At first, I thought it was just another tourist behind me, but when I glanced back, the room was empty. My partner was at the other end of the hall, too far away to be what I was hearing. I shook it off, thinking it was just my imagination, but then I heard it again. This time, it wasn't breathing. It was whispering. Low, raspy, like someone struggling to speak after days of silence. I took a step closer to the cell, trying to make out the words. I couldn't understand them, but they were getting louder, more desperate. My heart raced, but I felt compelled to listen. The whispers seemed to swirl around me, echoing off the stone walls. I strained to catch a word, any word, but all I could make out was, "Help me." Suddenly the temperature dropped, and I felt this cold breath on the back of my neck. Every hair on my body stood on end, and when I turned around, there was no one there. But then the whispering stopped, replaced by a deafening silence. The air felt thick, and I could barely breathe. I wanted to leave, but my feet wouldn't move. That's when I saw it. A figure just inside the cell. At first, it was nothing more than a shadow, but as I stared, it took form. A man, gaunt and pale, his eyes sunken and his clothes torn. He was reaching out, one hand gripping the bars as if he was trying to escape. His mouth moved, but I couldn't hear the words anymore. I stumbled back, my heart pounding out of my chest. I didn't need to be told twice. I bolted out of that room and didn't stop until I was outside in the cold air. My partner caught up with me, confused by my panic, but I couldn't explain it. Who would believe me? But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. To this day, I can still hear that whisper in my head, "Help me." And sometimes, in the dead of night, I wake up to that same cold breath on the back of my neck.